Our government is officially advising Canadians to avoid non-essential travel outside Canada. To those who were planning to travel, I say very clearly, now is not the time to travel.
My message to Canadians, first and foremost, is I understand this sucks.
Federal government says now is not the time to travel internationally. It is advising Canadians to rethink their holiday vacation plans, and WestJet is not happy about that. The airline said in a statement the advisory is, quote, not based on science and data. Andy Gibbons is the Vice President of Government Relations for WestJet, and he's in Ottawa. Thanks for joining us today to talk about this.
Thank you, Paul. Nice to see you.
Likewise. So why is WestJet so against this updated advisory, given what we currently know about the spread of this variant?
I think it's primarily based on past experience with advisories, Paul. Canada had an advisory against non-essential travel up until early October. And during those months, Canadians traveled across the continent and the globe. So it is our main issue is a frustration that we are sliding back into blanket policies, whereas other countries have more tailored travel guidance that is dependent on the country you're visiting, the type of travel you're thinking about. So the promise of vaccinations and the promise of testing was so that we wouldn't have blanket travel advisories anymore that we fundamentally don't think serve the traveling public.
I wonder if many Canadians, thinking back to earlier days in the pandemic, would recall that initially it spread through travel and that the first cases detected in this country of Omicron were in people who had recently traveled. Thus, some would think it might be a good idea to limit non-essential travel to curb the spread. But so you disagree with that?
Well, I think the fact that COVID can come through travel is why we've become a fully vaccinated airline and why, in partnering with the government, we've delivered on that mandate. And that's why we've been a voice for testing. So it's in recognition of that, Paul, that we've had such a strong safety and health record with respect to COVID. But also remember, if we're going down memory lane, last winter, we canceled all flights to sun destinations. And we did so in partnership with the federal government. And while travel was completely canceled, we had a third wave. So the main thrust of our point in our statement, it is a tough statement, but the main thrust is that we're asking the federal government to produce and be transparent about the data and science that's behind these measures. What are the COVID rates by country when it comes to travel? How many tests are needed? All of these questions, really have come to light given the fact that they've reintroduced the advisory.
Does WestJet have its own data underlining the safety in WestJet's view of travel, especially regards Omicron?
Well, the data is recorded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. So, for example, Paul, the Canadian Press reported yesterday that the positivity rate from inbound travelers for the last 2 weeks of November was 0.17, and since July it's been 0.20. So that's an incredible record. And we said in our statement that air travel is the most tested consumer activity in Canada. I'm not picking on the Toronto Raptors. I love the Toronto Raptors. They had a home match last night. No one has a mandatory PCR when they leave Scotiabank Arena or the Canadian Tire Centre, but every single guest on our airline, before they set foot in a Canadian airport coming home, has a mandatory PCR. So, that's something that we've achieved with the government. I think that's something that needs to be recognized in federal policy.
Obviously you're making the case on behalf of WestJet, but what is your concern about the threat to the Canadian economy broadly with this advisory?
We'll have to see. I mean, it's not even been maybe been 24 hours since the announcement, and we'll have to assess those impacts. There's so many communities we in Canada that rely on our investments. Many communities in Canada and their local airports rely on sun flying to keep their local economy going in the winter. And if we see major cancellations, it's possible that we may have to consolidate some of those investments. It's too early to tell right now, but obviously that's the last thing we ever want to do. what we want to do is fly Canadians safely, and to do so with proper measures in place, given the fact that we're partners in health.
I guess lastly, I would just ask, what would you suggest? Are you talking about wide open international travel? Like what, like, you know, as everybody's trying to figure out Omicron, you know, what should the government be doing in your view?
No one's asking for wide open travel. You know, airlines are very unique in the COVID equation because we are a safety business. And if we don't have a strong safety and health record, we aren't in business. So we are very different in that regard. What we're advocating for is travel guidance based on science and data, and for the government to present that. That is the fundamental premise and what has been lacking for the last 20 months. So we continue to call for that. But at the same time, Paul, we're working with the government to implement arrivals testing. We're working with them right now to put that in place across Canada, and we're proud to partner with them to do that. But at the same time, given that we're 20 months in, we do require a greater focus on how these policies are developed and what's going to be achieved by them. And, you know, we think these are legitimate questions to ask. And I think the response to our statement yesterday, you know, it's been overwhelmingly positive, and people have appreciated our frankness. And hopefully some of those answers will come from our statement.
And just very quickly, did you have any heads up on this, or did it hit you the same way it hit the rest of the country?
We were notified that they intended to proceed with an alteration to the travel advisory. That is the information they gave us before the announcement.
Okay, just curious. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andy Gibbons, WestJet. I appreciate your time.
Paul, thank you.